One of the strongest and central themes within the spirit of this age is the concept of gender and how that relates to the physical form. So today I'm going to be covering both the organic and evolutionary timelines that we will be experiencing regarding the higher spiritual meaning of gender, as well as the social engineered and distorted de-evolutionary timelines that gender is trying to be used as a mechanism to lead us down. The higher reality in any form of mystical tradition or in esotericism is that God or source is androgynous. It is a fully whole and sanctified androgynous being that is only given a he pronoun or a she pronoun, depending on what tradition and depending on what facets and what paradigm that specific esoteric tradition wants to regard the all through. That's why a lot of the father in Gnosticism or in other mystical traditions is still referring to the female gender as well, but they're highlighting it through and encompassing the all through that facet or that paradigm as the father. Whereas with some mystical traditions that use the mother or she, they're also including the masculine qualities and properties, but they're viewing it still through all encompassing in that facet of calling it through she. So in mystical traditions, when we're talking about gender, especially from a higher dimensional viewpoint, it is androgynous, and we're only using certain pronouns just to highlight one of the ways that it can be conveyed. It's really not that personal until we start taking that concept and then viewing it through a much lower lens and a much lower vibration. And then we start to actually think that this whole and sanctified and androgynous being is literally just a woman or a man. That's a very low consciousness way of perceiving what these terms are being used as. They were using that pronoun in a far more encompassing manner. This concept is reiterated in so many different traditions, I'm not even going to get into it. But one of the most well-known ones is Adam Kadmon from Jewish mysticism. And then we know from Gnosticism, the father. And then we know the barbello. And it's just androgyny with androgyny that's being used to create. So at a higher level of being, we understand that spirit is androgynous, but that it uses gender to personify itself in nature and as nature into every form and every scale of reality down all of the dimensions in order to create. This is most easily seen through the fact that babies are made between a sexual union between the masculine personified forces in nature and the feminine personified forces in nature. That is actually a reflection of the principle of gender being used in the physical realm. So even though gender isn't always the physicality and the physical reality of a being, still within the cosmos, I'm not referring to nature meaning you go out to the forest. Nature is the cosmos, it's consciousness itself, it's the multiverse. So gender is used to create through every form and every scale within this universe through that masculine and feminine polarity. So gender in and of itself, even though the higher reality of consciousness is androgynous, gender is very much used as creation. It's a part of the generative force within our reality. So even though gender is distinct from sex or biology, due to the fact that gender is personified forces in our nature, sex or biology is still gender, due to the fact that gender expresses itself here in this material third dimensional world as sex. So you could look at it like we as humans have two genders. We have the gender of how we choose to identify with the personified forces in nature, and then the gender of specifically the biology of our physical vehicle. So in an age when we're embodying and we're integrating more of our multidimensional nature, one of the ways that that's going to manifest is as gender dysphoria. But gender dysphoria is worlds away from actual transgenderism as well as transsexuality. So even though transsexuality and transgenderism are both completely organic experiences for source consciousness to incarnate as well as having higher dimensional roles and higher dimensional purposes, that is still not going to be the large, overwhelming majority of all souls' experiences when they're coming into gender dysphoria. Because what's actually happening is that this organic evolutionary process of consciousness that is manifested and played out through this concept of gender can become extraordinarily manipulated, distorted, and used as a part of social engineering to push humanity down an artificial intelligent, de-evolutionary timeline. And that's what we see being played out. And it looks nothing like this at this moment, but the long con in this is an artificial intelligence agenda. And so this holy, sacred, sanctified experience of gender that gets played out both in non-physical and in physical form within each soul has an organic expression of consciousness. Absolutely. That's what I call unity consciousness. That's where the individual rectifies, harmonizes, and integrates this concept of gender in a deeply healing and aligned way. So for those higher timelines for humanity and those higher potential outcomes for our evolution, that's going to be done through the mechanism of healing and unifying our internal forces into unity consciousness. But whenever there is an organic expression, there is always its detrimental, or what I call synthetic side. And what we're seeing with this synthetic side of how gender is to be unified is not done through the concept of transsexual or transgender, but more so, it is done through the social engineering behind those identities. Let me explain what I'm saying. The LGBTQ community, which I am a part of, I'm a lesbian, our entire community is being used as a human shield right now. And it's going to be used as a human shield moving forward, really. Because our whole identity is being used to carry out an agenda and social engineering that actually has very little to do with our LGBTQ community. It's just being used as that device, as that mechanism in order to set up social engineering within the collective, to make it think that it's coming only from the goodness and the support and the care of institutions that don't care at all about the LGBTQ community. They don't care at all about transsexuals. They don't care at all about transgenders. They don't care about any of us. And they don't care about the populace at large. But instead, what they're doing is through social engineering, they're making everything look like it's completely organically coming from the community and the response from institutions to this cry for help from our community. And it's this controlled opposition, forced little puppet act that's playing out. Because the truth of the matter is the LGBTQ community does not, in the larger scope of things, have the power, even if we wish to, have all of the laws and regulations that are being pushed under our name. We don't actually have the power. We're not a large enough percentage of the majority or of the populace to have that sort of power. So the only way that this is actually being carried out in the sake of our names is done by institutions that have their own agenda in mind. And their own agenda at mind is one of an artificial intelligence timeline. It's ruled by AI, and it's what is called in mysticism a de-evolutionary timeline, a de-evolutionary stream. So it's a stream or a timeline that leads further and further and further down to where it's looking like it's progressive. It's looking like it's evolution. It's mocking and imposturing the entire time what actual organic evolution looks like. And it's being done mainly, this agenda is carried out not just through the LGBT community's identity. The powers that were use every single group, every single race's identity as a human shield in order to push things. And then you can't talk about what that agenda is because then it looks like you're talking about that group. I summed all of this up beautifully in one of my poems where I talk about how this is like walking through friendly fire. You have to strike at the roots while the branches swing at you. The branches, of course, being people a part of our own community, people a part of our own humanity, that we're not actually at all trying to attack. We're trying to get to the origins of all of these different nefarious agendas that are taking place using our identities as a mask and using them as a human shield in order to push them through. So when you have something like the LGBTQ community, who has been severely oppressed in the past, and the reality of our experience, our shared experience, even though we have different and unique lives and experiences, there's still this overall experience of us being oppressed and not accepted. And so we have a collective wound around not being accepted and seeking that approval, seeking that validation. So that wound is being very much activated and it's being manipulated against us because what we see as being, here, we need to give you guys support. We need to build you guys up. We need to give you guys more laws, more regulations. We think that that's coming from a place of love. We can't see the distortion behind it, that we're being used a part of an agenda that does not love us at all. So we have that wound around validation, and that's what's making all of this more inflamed. So you have organic things happening at the same time as synthetic or socially engineered things happening. You have the fact that the LGBTQ community, especially the transgender and the transsexual aspect of our community, really want to be represented. They want to be represented and they want to be included into the totality of society and culture at large, which is absolutely, of course, normal. Like, that is not taking things too far. That is something that is a basic human right. Anyone who would really oppose that is coming from like a fearful or entitled, threatened place. Trans people haven't been represented and they haven't been included within our collective paradigm in this modern age. In ancient times, trans people were either divine or demonic, and it ebbed and flowed like that depending on whatever part of the age that they were in at that time. But in modern times, there has been no representation of them. So it's common and it's entirely natural for them to seek representation and to seek inclusion. But seeking representation and inclusion is entirely different than restructuring and dismantling our current concepts of gender in the name of representation and in the name of inclusion. Because representation and inclusion don't need to dismember the way that sex and the way that structure within the biological reality of sex is set up. So to do so even would be entirely delusional, if I'm just being honest, with peace and love, because sex is the nature of the cosmos, just like gender is the nature of the cosmos. So they're both real, and to pit one against the other or to choose one over the other is not based in reality. So it's not honoring the biological reality of what's happening, and it has severe karmic implications when humanity tries to restructure exactly the sacredness of physicality and the way that biology reflects physicality. Because at that point, when we begin to restructure and tear apart exactly what mother is and turn it into something like a birther or a person with a vulva, or when we turn sacred concepts of biology and the gender that they represent into things of a more diminishing form in the name of inclusion, that's not really inclusion. What's happening is this is pushing us very incrementally. It's so slow, it's so incrementally, it will look like it's inclusion, but it's not. These are ways of incrementally dismembering our connection with these higher concepts of sex, which have their roles just like gender does in the cosmos. And the reason why I'm honing in on this specifically is because when you start to, in the name of representation and in the name of inclusion, start to target specific forms, let's say the goddess, or let's say mother, there are etymological, energetic, vibrational codes within these concepts. So to manipulate them is what we call in mysticism harmonic. Harmonic is the term that I will be using moving forward for what we know in modern days as satanic, but harmonic just sounds a little less intense. So harmonic forces, which is one of the challenges and trials and tribulations within this age, is very much interested in making sure that our connection to spirit and all of these concepts that have a higher spiritual implication and have a higher spiritual role get completely severed off, because harmonic beings are behind the artificial intelligent timelines. And what they are very interested in is vying for the human consciousness, vying for our own consent and our own free will to be pushed down pathways that actually look like they're super evolutionary, such as technology, such as revolutionary gender dysphoria. But grooming and training these concepts down a path that doesn't actually help our evolution but harms it severely. Because when we get further down the line of artificial intelligence, what we'll see is that it had its origins and conceptions in us completely dismembering the concepts of sex. And that is what harmonic forces are heavily interested in. They are heavily interested not in the fact that trans people get included and represented into the collective psyche and the collective population, which they absolutely deserve to be because they're human and they're divine souls. But that's not what harmonic forces are interested in. What they're using the LGBTQ community for is as a human shield so that we start dismembering, getting super confused, and manipulating what sex is in relationship to gender. The reason why is because it wants to completely dismember sex. It needs us to become sexless in order to further push the artificial intelligent movement. Because down that line, further and further and further, what you will see with the de-evolutionized pathway is not the integration of gender to its whole and aligned state. You'll see the mockery of that down these artificial intelligent pathways. You'll see it turning from this concept that we're now all talking about, which is trans people, or which is just gender dysphoria in general, into transhumanism. But it can't get us down transhumanism all the way. It can't even go there yet until it gets us to target sex and to start dismembering sex and making that the norm. They have to normalize the dismembering of sex, the dismembering of the biological physical form, in order to start getting us entrained down that transhumanist pathway. So you have transhumanism being the end game of harmonic forces. This is all being done by the military-industrial complex. They're the ones who have the actual power within the institutions to start regulating and putting laws into place for trans youth, when trans youth isn't even the term that should be defined for every single person who's going through gender dysphoria. I need to share a personal story in order to highlight just how nuanced gender as a theme is. Some people never go through life having to ever question the theme of gender, and then for other people, it's an overarching storyline. So for me as a kid, I identified more so with masculine attributes or masculine traits. And so for me, I had so much gender dysphoria being in a female biological body. And the gender dysphoria really peaked when I was in middle school, to the point where things got very dark, things got very confusing, and very hopeless. If I had been given the resources and the support that trans youth are given today, I would have felt completely heartbroken and robbed of my own unique life path, of my own unique challenges, of my own unique art that would be made by those unique challenges. I wouldn't have been able to make peace with my sex. I wouldn't have been able to come to terms with my original intent incarnating into this dilemma if I was given the support that people are given at age 12 right now and being called trans youth. Because what I had was a large spirit that needed to unfold and have certain friction for my life path that contained unique contrasts specifically for my soul's lessons. I was always destined to go through some form of gender dysphoria, regardless of what physical form I was born into. Because when you're a large spirit, you're going to go, wait, don't leave my masculine spirit, or wait, don't leave my feminine spirit. You're just going to go through dysphoria regardless. It's really at that point not about the physical sex that you're born into. Now, that's not everyone's experience, but I'm talking about the majority of what's happening is that trans youth is a label being given when in reality, it's not trans youth. That's way too soon to be calling youth trans. That's at that point, we're figuring things out. We're setting up a story arc for ourselves. We're doing a lot of things going on. So the higher dimensional nature of the fact that gender fluidity is the larger truth of nature still applies, but also give kids a chance, give youth a chance to make peace with their biological form, to make peace with their own unique journey. Because not all of them, in fact, the majority of them are not going to actually be genuine transgender, and they're not going to actually be genuine transsexual. Genuine transsexual beings are a rite of passage to be held almost like in an indigenous or shamanic way, that only a very, very, very small percentage of humanity is meant with that higher dimensional role to hold that energy, to hold that point. So the fact that, yes, we have a full LGBTQ community that has been utterly oppressed and, traumatized by their oppression, wanting inclusion and wanting representation is utterly valid. But to be aggressive in the way that that representation gets carried out and to be aggressive in the way that that support manifests is actually not helpful, and it's actually extraordinarily harmful when we're doing that with youth. So youth, we're supposed to be the stewards of, because regardless of how intuitive youth are, which they're very intuitive, the child archetype, yes, even adolescence counts for the child archetype. The child archetype has a shadow side, and that archetype is the child mentality in all of us. This isn't just in youth, but it manifests in all of us, is the mentality that wants what they want when they want it. And if they don't, they throw like a huge tantrum. So if they want a hula hoop and a hula hoop's not there at that immediate moment, you're going to see them freak out. And how they would eat, should they be given no regulation, they'd have a glazed donut for breakfast, they'd have a glazed donut for lunch and for dinner. They have no concept of discipline. As intuitive as they are, and as connected with their original divinity as they are, with peace and love, youth don't know jack. Not only do they not know jack, they don't even know all of the different professions out there in the world, let alone all of the different ways that their life path can unfold. They're not seen or exposed to all the different experiences that will be available to them. But also, youth don't have any threshold for discomfort. And because they don't have any threshold, they will go into whatever is in their immediate experience, and they will impress upon that as though it is a permanent and fixed thing. That's why adults need to support them and steward them, not by giving in to whatever they consider permanent, but by helping them cope, helping them be able to have support in the immediacy or in whatever is going on in their reality, their internal landscape, and how they can feel safely supported in the external. And that is the number one way to integrate and to really support in a loving and truly aligned way gender dysphoria. It's by really validating and really being able to hold that sacred space for them, even though they might feel that every single thing they're going through is 100% permanent, because that's the mind of the child archetype. So it's having that reassurance that they are not wrong, having that reassurance that they are validated, but not giving in to every single thing that they need, because that's not even stewardship. All of this really is setting up the new norm for gender dysphoria to be treated as trans youth. And there is absolute train tracks people are sent through by that process. So having that be the norm of, hey, you go down these train tracks, you get puberty blockers and then this and this and that, that is being pushed as normal. That's not true support. That's not true holding space. That is a wounded mind to project their experience onto the entire population of anyone who is going through discomfort in their current biological form or going through gender dysphoria, just to blatantly and largely project our own internal experience, our own unique life path onto every single person who's going through any sort of gendering questioning. That is such a traumatized mind that wants to just go in and treat every single person like how they wish they were treated. Now, there are so many different issues at play here within this overall topic. So since I'm covering the esoteric and the spiritual implications, I'm going to link to a video that does a great job of speaking to the everyday dilemmas that are encountered with this topic, and it's done by a conversation between trans people and people who have detransitioned. So you could check that out below. Higher consciousness, specifically unity consciousness, isn't done by rejecting whatever genders. It's okay if a person naturally has integrated gender. And if they naturally integrate gender, they might not, fully resonate with the concept of gender. That's a completely different location. A person like that is coming from a way different frequency than what we're seeing people who reject gender come from. They're not coming from this exalted, integrated space, because a person who's truly reached unity consciousness doesn't reject gender. They actually don't have a problem with gender at that point. It's people who have rejected gender that are going, well, I don't identify as gender. And in reality, the majority of people are not at that true frequency of unity consciousness. They're in some form of resistance or rejection to gender. Because once again, unity consciousness, when you're truly in that frequency, you're not trying to make some sort of talking point to prove that sex is not gender. You honor gender, you honor sex, you honor that sex is gender still being expressed on this plane. And you're in this harmony. You're in this way of loving your form and accepting your form. Ahriman is the personification in nature of the principle of calcification. If you need to pause and rewind that to understand what I just said, do so. So everything is personified forces in nature. Ahriman would be the force in nature that seeks to calcify, and that is devolutionary. So it wants to make everything matter-based. Even though there's a very spiritual and exalted form to matter, there's also just as much a negative form to matter, and that is when it's completely cut off from spirit. So Ahriman is that principle. It is that embodiment and that personified force in nature that wishes to always extract matter from spirit so that there's no more spirit and it becomes fully materialized, fully in deeper and deeper and deeper into matter so that it calcifies. And that's what we would know as de-evolution, because it's completely cut off from spirit. And none of this would actually look like that's happening, but it's taking place in so many different themes within the spirit of this age that don't even look interconnected. It's taking place through technology, well, the negative parts of technology. It's taking part through this overall theme of helping trans youth. It's taking place in so many different arenas that's making it look like it's helpful and it's supportive and it's innovative and it's groundbreaking, when in reality, a lot of that is of a synthetic nature. It's of a way that's leading to de-evolution. Whereas there's always going to be the organic opportunity and the evolutionary opportunity within those same trials and tribulations. Since the integration of gender is a symptom of higher consciousness, our evolution will naturally lead each individual to embrace and balance their masculine and feminine energies. This is a part of stepping into multidimensional awareness, as well as embodying our higher self. How each individual expresses the spiritual forces of gender will be unique and personal to their soul and to their creative evolution. The two biggest wounds being healed in this age are the wounds the human collective shares regarding both the sex and violence imprint and shame and gender imprint. Shame for being born into a perceived inferior gender, whether the gender we perceive as inferior is male or female. Shame for not being able to fulfill societal expectations that are attached to their gender roles as the sex we were born into. Shame for needing to repress everything that was felt or thought out of line with our gender. Ancestral shame for violent traumas that were inflicted upon us due to our gender. So all of the dilemmas we see playing out in this age are not an accident, and they are not fabricated by dark forces. Dark forces can only capitalize on them. The dilemmas themselves have come to the surface of the human collective for healing because they are our next step in evolution. That's the trials and tribulations within our age specifically. It's how gender and technology moving forward are going to have their organic expressions and they're going to have their synthetic expressions. I hope this has helped you bring more discernment into the expressions of this age. Make sure to subscribe to my channel for higher dimensional guidance through spiritual awakening. See you next time.